What would you do if a dying stranger collapsed at your feet and saving his life meant entering a world of betrayal, poison, and organized crime? Would you call 911 and risk his deportation? Or would you risk everything you have to keep him alive? Tonight, I'm bringing you the story of Aaliyah Grant, a medical school dropout working double shifts at a diner, just trying to keep her family afloat. She's exhausted, invisible, forgotten by the world. Then one night, a man stumbles through her door. Black veins crawling up his neck. Pulse failing. Minutes from death. And Aaliyah recognizes the symptoms immediately. He's been poisoned. Professionally. Intentionally. She has seconds to decide. Call the authorities and watch him die in custody. Or break every rule she's ever learned and try to save him herself. What she doesn't know is that this man is Lee Hyun-jin, a ruthless mafia boss with enemies closing in from every direction. And her decision to keep him alive just made her the only person standing between him and a conspiracy that goes deeper than either of them could imagine. Before we dive into what happens next, if you love stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, stories where the underdog outsmarts an entire criminal empire, smash that like button right now. This story gets absolutely insane. Subscribe and turn on notifications because you do not want to miss how Aaliyah uses nothing but her grandmother's herbal remedies and her own brilliance to expose a betrayal that will shake everything. Drop a comment and tell me, would you save a dangerous stranger's life? Let me know below. Alright, let's jump in, because Aaliyah has less than 48 hours to keep this man alive. The evening had started in Manhattan like any other high-stakes negotiation, the kind Lee Hyun-jin thrived on. 6 hours earlier, in a private dining room of a sleek midtown restaurant, his inner circle raised their glasses, faces taut with the tension of serving a man whose reputation alone could snap careers and lives. Every smile was measured, every word calculated, because in Hyun-jin's presence, fear had teeth. The room hummed with a brittle energy as the waiter poured the vintage wine, and Hyun-jin's gaze swept the table like a predator, sizing up prey. He toasted to success, to loyalty, and to the future of the Iron Lotus Syndicate, never noticing the subtle glint in one of the glasses. The poison slipped in so delicately it might have passed for nothing more than a flourish of the sommelier's hand. By the time Hyun-jin left the restaurant, the first wave of the toxin had already begun its silent work. Black veins crept along his forearms, his vision blurred, and a cold sweat prickled across his scalp. His usual iron control slipped, replaced by a gnawing dread. He barked at his driver to pull over, gripping the door as if it were the last anchor to consciousness. He stumbled into the nearest diner, the fluorescent lights washing over his pale, rigid face. Patrons glanced up briefly, then returned to their burgers, oblivious to the man teetering on the edge of death. Aaliyah Grant was at the end of her double shift, the clatter of plates, and the hiss of the espresso machine grating against her exhaustion. She had just started wiping down the counter when the man collapsed through the door. Her instincts snapped awake, honed from years of medical study, and she rushed to his side. His pulse was erratic, his breathing shallow, the black webbing along his neck unmistakable. Her mind raced through textbook symptoms, organophosphate poisoning, classic but rarely seen outside a lab. She grabbed her emergency kit from under the counter, fingers trembling slightly as adrenaline took over. "Stay with me," she murmured, pressing pressure to his carotid. His eyes fluttered open, panic briefly surfacing before a haze of delirium took over. She checked his ID quickly, noting the unfamiliar name, Lee Hyun-jin, and the crisp photograph of a man who looked nothing like the chaos before her. A glint of metal caught her eye, a gun tucked inside his coat, and then, almost forgotten in the rush, the passport. Not American. Not even a hint of English on it. Her heart skipped. This was no ordinary stranger. She adjusted his position gently, voice low and steady, trying to mask the swirl of questions in her head. How had this man ended up here, collapsing like a common diner customer? What had he done to make someone want him dead? And more importantly, how was she going to keep him alive with nothing but her knowledge, her wits, and the odd assortment of herbal remedies her grandmother had trusted her to understand? Every instinct screamed caution. But as she looked down at the man convulsing lightly under the harsh neon light, she knew one truth above all else. She couldn't let him die. Not here. Not like this. Before we dive into how a waitress outsmarted an entire criminal empire, do me a favor, if you're already hooked by this story, smash that like button right now. And if you want more incredible true-to-life stories about unlikely heroes and impossible choices, hit subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Alright, let's get back to the story. Because, what did Aaliyah do in those first 5 minutes? It broke every rule she'd ever learned in medical school. With precise movements, she began clearing space on the counter, applying what she knew of antidotes and stabilizing agents, improvising with the limited supplies at hand. Her fingers moved over syringes, vials, and gauze like a conductor directing a desperate orchestra, each decision a potential life or death gamble. Hyun-jin's face twisted in pain, his hands clenching the formica table, and she leaned closer, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure he could hear. Every second mattered. The poison was relentless, insidious, and invisible. Her mind cataloged every detail, the way he flinched at sounds, the tension in his shoulders, the subtle twitch in his eyelids. This stranger was powerful, deadly, yet broken in ways only she could see right now. Aaliyah's pulse surged as she realized the enormity of the choice she had made. This wasn't just saving a man, it was stepping into a world she had no map for, a world of fear, betrayal, and violence, and she was now in its center. The diner hummed with oblivious life, the night pressing in through the fogged windows. In that stark fluorescent light, a fragile, dangerous partnership had begun, one forged in desperation and instinct, with the stakes higher than either of them could yet comprehend. Aaliyah hovered over the man sprawled across the diner counter, her mind spinning with impossible choices. The adrenaline from dragging him inside had barely faded, leaving a buzzing in her ears. Call 911, and the paramedics would arrive, yes, but so would IC. He'd be interrogated, detained, and possibly deported before she even had a chance to understand who he was or why someone wanted him dead. And yet, doing nothing was unthinkable. Her fingers itched for a pulse, for a way to keep him alive long enough to make sense of the chaos. She drew in a sharp breath and remembered her med school professor's voice, echoing in her head like a mantra. A doctor's oath doesn't ask about the patient's past. The words, once abstract, now weighed on her shoulders like armor she didn't know she had. Whoever he was, whatever darkness surrounded him, that oath meant she acted first, questioned later. With a determined nod, she grabbed the man under his arms, her strength fueled by adrenaline and necessity. He groaned, a ragged, half-conscious sound that seemed to vibrate through the air like a warning. But she didn't flinch. Each step to the car was measured, deliberate, muscles straining as she lifted him into the back seat. Passers-by glanced but assumed some drunken collapse. No one interfered. Her heart pounded, not from exertion but from the knowledge of what she was about to do. The drive to her grandmother's apartment above the herbal shop was tense and silent, Hyun-jin's labored breathing punctuating the street noise. Lorraine's eyes widened as Aaliyah burst through the door, dragging the nearly lifeless man across the threshold. "Aaliyah, what? Who is this?" she exclaimed, hands on her hips, a mixture of shock and habitual caution in her voice. "He's poisoned," Aaliyah said, breathless, scanning the small apartment for supplies. "We don't have time for questions." Lorraine's skepticism softened slightly. She knew her granddaughter's instincts were sharp, honed over years of medical training and reckless courage. "Then we start," she muttered, moving to gather vials, herbs, and bandages. What followed was a blur of motion. For fluid slid into veins, Activated charcoal was administered, and the scent of crushed traditional herbs filled the cramped space. Aaliyah's hands moved with precision, even as sweat dripped down her temple, blending science and centuries-old remedies in a desperate symphony of life-saving action. Hyun-jin twitched, muttering fragments of voices and faces, betrayal and anger blending in fevered dreams that made the room feel smaller, more suffocating. Hours passed. The heat of the apartment, the sharp tang of medicine, and the rhythmic beeping of a borrowed heart rate monitor became background noise. When he finally stirred, his eyes were glassy, and yet the intensity behind them remained. He struggled to focus, voice weak but demanding. "Why would you save me?" Aaliyah met his gaze evenly, chest heaving. She didn't lie, but she didn't offer answers she didn't yet know herself. "I don't know yet," she admitted softly, feeling the weight of those words settle between them like a fragile truce. For the first time that night, the room was silent except for his shallow breaths and her own heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city hummed on, oblivious to the fragile alliance forming above a humble herbal shop, a choice that might alter more than just one life. Hyun-jin tried to push himself upright, the steel in his posture returning despite the weakness. The moment his legs carried him a step, the world tilted violently. Pain shot through his veins, black tendrils snaking beneath his skin like fire and water, and he collapsed onto the floor with a grunt that was half frustration, half fear. Aaliyah knelt beside him, gripping his shoulders firmly, her eyes hard but calm. "You've got maybe 36 hours before your organs shut down. You're not going anywhere," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. He coughed, rasping through blood-tinged saliva, and fixed her with a glare that could kill. "And what do you want?" he demanded. "Everyone wants something. Everyone has a price." Aaliyah reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, flipping it to show him a single image, her 16-year-old brother, Marcus, standing awkwardly at the edge of a street corner, flanked by young men whose body language screamed recruitment, intimidation, and threat. Hyun-jin's brow furrowed, his lips twitching into something that almost resembled interest. "Keep him alive," she said steadily. "Keep him out of that world. That's my price." He laughed then, a low, mirthless sound that filled the small apartment. "You saved a monster to protect your brother from becoming one?" The irony hung between them, thick and sharp as the herbal-scented air. He coughed again, wincing, and the sound cut through the moment like a knife. "Yes," she said simply, almost too calmly. "That's exactly it." For a long beat, he studied her, eyes flicking to the black veins still rising along his forearms. Then slowly, deliberately, he nodded.
"Fine."
"I agree. But understand this," he warned, voice low, steady despite the fever heating his skin. "Once you're in my world, you can't get out clean. There's no going back." Lorraine, Aaliyah's grandmother, watched quietly from the kitchen, her hands folded over a mixture of crushed roots and dried leaves. "This," she said softly, "will slow the poison, but it will not cure it." She set down the mixture carefully, the scent of earth and herbs filling the cramped room. Hyun-jin's eyes followed the movement, registering the logic. The antidote existed, yes, but it lay thousands of miles away in Seoul, guarded by his organization, unreachable without drawing attention to himself, or to her. The plan began to form between them like a fragile lattice of trust and necessity. He would remain here, out of sight, as the world assumed he was either dead or dying, while they worked together to expose the conspiracy from the shadows. Aaliyah would navigate the streets, keep her brother safe, and provide the support her grandmother's ancient remedies could afford. Hyun-jin tested his strength, flexing his fingers and rolling his shoulders. Pain lanced through him, but he kept his expression controlled. "Then we do this carefully," he said, almost conversationally. "Step by step. One mistake, and it's over for both of us." Aaliyah nodded, her stomach twisting with the weight of what she had agreed to. She had stabilized him for now, bought time with herbs and intuition, and made a deal that tethered her life to a man whose power could destroy everything she loved. But for Marcus, for the chance to stop a new monster from forming, there was no turning back. Pause for just a second. The first test came sooner than she expected. Kim Min-seo, reputed to be Hyun-jin's right hand, entered the diner with casual authority. His eyes flicked over the room, noting the patrons, the staff, and finally landing on her. "Any sick Korean men coming in?" he asked casually, as though the question had nothing to do with the man she had just saved. Aaliyah tilted her head, masking recognition with the perfect blend of fatigue and disinterest. "Sick Korean men?" she echoed, voice light. "Can't say that I've seen anyone like that today." She memorized everything. The cut of his jacket, the new leather shoes that gleamed slightly too bright, the way his hands flexed, measuring, calculating. Minutes later, a younger lieutenant arrived, nerves jittering beneath his skin, his eyes darting to the doorway and back to her. He asked the same questions, almost pleading for reassurance. His knuckles bore dark bruises, evidence of information extracted by pain. Aaliyah nodded politely, feigning ignorance, yet etched every tremor, every hesitation into her memory. The third visitor was older, relaxed, ordering coffee like he had nothing pressing on his mind. He didn't ask pointed questions, didn't search for confirmation. Aaliyah noted that this man's calm was either ignorance or certainty, and the lack of tension told her more than words ever could. Later, reporting back to Hyun-jin, she laid out her observations with meticulous precision. Min-seo's new shoes indicated recent wealth or favoritism, a man climbing, ambitious. The young lieutenant's bruises revealed the violence behind the questions. Someone had already tried to intimidate him. And the older man's composure? Either he already knew where Hyun-jin was, or he believed him beyond saving. Hyun-jin's eyes darkened as he listened, the puzzle shifting in his mind. Through her eyes, he began to see the fractures in his own empire, the subtle currents of loyalty and treachery. Each tiny detail Aaliyah had observed painted a picture he hadn't had the patience, or distance, to notice himself. "You've got an eye for this," he murmured, voice hoarse but filled with a new edge of respect. "Details others dismissed, you notice." Aaliyah shrugged, hiding the weight of her secret victories beneath the simple gesture. For now, the Watchers had come, and she had catalogued everything. Hyun-jin's survival depended on their careful dance, each observation a thread in a fragile web of deception, insight, and instinct. And for the first time, he realized that the world he thought he controlled was seeing him differently through the eyes of a girl who should have been powerless, but wasn't. The clock pressed down on them, every tick a reminder that Hyun-jin had less than 24 hours before the poison ravaging his body became irreversible. He leaned back in the worn chair, eyes narrowed, studying Aaliyah as if measuring her potential for survival in a world he'd spent decades mastering. "You need to see my people the way I do," he said, voice rough but insistent. "Every gesture, every glance, every hesitation tells a story. Watch closely, learn the hierarchy, the loyalty, the fear." She nodded, absorbing the lessons as they moved through subtle demonstrations, the curl of a shoulder signaling deference, the way a hand hovered over a pocket revealing threat, the faint tightening of a jaw marking defiance. Her own observations, shaped by her outsider's perspective, were not lost on him. "And you," she said carefully, "notice how desperation bends them. How outsiders like me, Americans, foreigners, are treated with a mixture of suspicion and contempt. How money, race, even accent shifts the power dynamic." Hyun-jin grunted, an unspoken acknowledgement of the truth. Their worlds were different, yet eerily parallel, his built on rigid loyalty and coded silence, hers on adaptability, quick thinking, and survival. As they exchanged insights, an invisible bridge formed between them, linking instincts honed in hardship with lessons learned in brutality. He caught her gaze lingering on the worn edges of the diner, and she allowed herself a flashback. Med school had been her path, but life had other plans. Her father falling ill, bills stacking up, the suffocating weight of responsibility pressing her out of classrooms and into the streets, into jobs that paid in tips and exhaustion. And now here she was, a healer turned covert observer, balancing lives on intuition alone. Hyun-jin's own past surfaced in fragmented recollections. Orphaned young, he had clawed his way from nothing to power, each alliance a potential knife in the back. Trust was a weakness, loyalty was currency, and survival meant learning early that compassion could be fatal. They saw in each other shades of themselves, protectors carrying guilt, isolated by circumstance, hardened yet not without hope. The moment their shared understanding crystallized, a sharp sound from the street caught Aaliyah's attention. Marcus, her brother, stepped inside with 3 gang members trailing him, faces taut with the edge of expectation. Her stomach twisted as she recognized the recruiter among them, not a local opportunist, but a member of a rival syndicate, one with interests directly opposed to Hyun-jin. The connection clicked instantly. The conspiracy wasn't just internal squabbling within Hyun-jin's empire, it was coordinated, with outside forces leveraging her brother as a bargaining chip. Marcus's recruitment wasn't happenstance, it was insurance, a silent threat ensuring that if Hyun-jin survived, Aaliyah would be forced to play along, to negotiate her family's safety against the tides of empire-shaking betrayal. Hyun-jin's eyes darkened as he watched her, the realization dawning that the threads of his world and hers had been interwoven deliberately, dangerously, and personally. For the first time, he understood that the lesson wasn't just about seeing, sometimes it was about understanding the stakes that others dared not mention and the people they would do anything to protect. Aaliyah spread the papers across the counter, markers in hand, turning the diner's back corner into a war room of sorts. Each visitor, each subtle gesture, every question and hesitation was catalogued meticulously. She drew lines connecting the dots. Who knew what, who wanted what, who had been bribed or threatened. The chart began to breathe a story of its own, a map of hidden intentions and fractured loyalties. Hyun-jin watched over her shoulder, pale but alert, a faint fever haze in his eyes. Slowly the pattern emerged. 3 names recurred like ghosts at every intersection of the web. Kim Min-seo, the ambitious right hand whose polished exterior barely masked the hunger for advancement. David Park, the accountant who controlled the flow of money and subtly influenced every decision. And a third, unseen force, a foreign connection they had yet to identify, someone playing the strings from a distance. He let out a low, bitter laugh, the sound hollow. All of this from the people I trusted most. I raised them, elevated them, and his voice broke on the last word. Betrayal had a weight that no wealth or power could counterbalance. Aaliyah's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. They didn't betray you. They never belonged to you. Fear isn't loyalty. The words struck him with a force that left him momentarily speechless. His empire, meticulously built over decades, suddenly felt fragile, as though each brick were laid on sand rather than stone. For the first time, he saw not just the threats outside his walls, but the rot inside them, the illusion of allegiance that had propped up his power for years. The tension tightened further when Aaliyah's phone buzzed. A text with a location. Her stomach dropped. Marcus was being held at a warehouse, an insurance policy activated to ensure compliance, a living leverage over both of them. 12 hours remained before the poison in Hyun-jin's system became irreversible. Every choice now carried risk. Save the boy immediately and expose themselves, or set the trap perfectly, risking Marcus's life in the interim. Aaliyah looked at him, the quiet certainty in her eyes meeting his own simmering desperation. "We do both," she said, voice calm but firm. "But you're going to have to trust me completely." For a long moment, Hyun-jin said nothing, the weight of his lifetime of control and caution pressing down on him. Then, for the first time in decades, he nodded. "I do," he whispered, a sound both simple and monumental. It was more than agreement. It was surrender. It was faith. It was the opening of a door he had never before dared approach. Together, they began to move with deliberate precision. Every call, every step, every observation fed into the larger design. Save Marcus, expose the conspirators, survive the poison. The web of betrayal, once invisible, now had its pattern revealed, and the first threads of their counterattack were being woven. Aaliyah's keen eyes and Hyun-jin's experience merged into a singular focus, and for the first time, the future felt like something they might shape rather than endure. Okay, stop. Do you see what just happened? This woman, who everyone dismissed as just a waitress, is literally piecing together a conspiracy that professional criminals couldn't see. If you're as blown away as I am by Aaliyah's brilliance, show some love by hitting that like button. Share this with someone who loves a good underdog story. And comment below, Aaliyah deserves everything if you're rooting for her. Because what is she going to do next? It's going to save lives, but it might cost her own. Alright, back to the story. Because Hyun-jin just realized something that changed everything. This wasn't just about taking his empire. This was personal. The diner was quiet, the calm before a storm neither of them could ignore. 8 hours remained on the poison clock, each minute pressing against the fragile line between life and death. Aaliyah moved with deliberate precision, mixing a new herbal compound into a small vial, her hands steady despite the risk. If this doesn't work? Hyun-jin's voice was low, strained. Then you die, she said honestly. But you were dying anyway. At least this way, you die fighting. He studied her, the tension in his chest mirrored in her determined eyes. They shared a meal, a simple plate of stew, grandmother Lorraine's cooking, seasoned with the memory of home and resilience. They ate slowly, silently acknowledging the stakes in each bite. Finally, he broke the quiet. Why did you really save me? You could have done nothing. No one would have blamed you. Aaliyah met his gaze, unflinching. I watched my dad die because we couldn't afford his medicine. I watched the system decide his life wasn't worth saving. When I saw you dying, I refused to be the person who decides someone doesn't deserve to live. Even you. The words hung between them, heavy yet liberating. Hyun-jin's chest rose and fell, as if he were shedding decades of armor. I built an empire, but I have no one, he admitted quietly. You have nothing, but you're rich in ways I'll never be. The plan crystallized as the sun dipped low outside, shadows stretching across the room. Aaliyah would attend the meeting as Hyun-jin's witness to his final moments, wearing a wire to capture every confession. Hyun-jin would emerge at the perfect moment, his people simultaneously rescuing Marcus, while the antidote would be seized directly from the conspirators. Every variable had to align flawlessly. Hyun-jin's focus sharpened as he reached across the table, placing a hand over hers. One phrase, he said, in Korean. You need to say it exactly. It signals my loyal people, tells them everything is good. She repeated it, voice low, steady, rolling the syllables over her tongue until it sounded like a native's. Perfect, he nodded, the smallest smile breaking through his exhaustion. Any mistake, and it could be your last. Or mine. They practiced again and again, each repetition embedding the code deep into muscle memory. Every glance between them carried unspoken understanding, fear tempered by trust, desperation replaced by strategy, the bond of two people standing at the precipice of chaos. Aaliyah felt it in her chest, the rush of purpose mingling with adrenaline, the gravity of what was to come. Hyun-jin, for the first time in years, allowed himself to hope, not for empire, not for control, but for connection, for the possibility that the world could be tilted back in their favor, that Marcus could be safe, and that betrayal could be countered with courage. As the last hours of daylight faded, The diner became a crucible of transformation. Student and teacher, protector and strategist, they were no longer merely surviving. They were preparing to strike back, together, in a way neither could have accomplished alone. Every lesson, every confession, every whispered syllable of code was now a weapon in the delicate balance between life and death. Their fates were intertwined, and the world outside was about to witness the culmination of trust forged in fire. The city skyline glared down at her as Aaliyah stepped into the high-rise, her heels clicking softly against polished marble. 2 hours remained on the poison clock, and with each step, her chest tightened. Fear tried to curl in her stomach, but she pushed it down, channeling every ounce of focus and strength she had learned in the past days. The elevators hummed, carrying her upward, each floor a countdown closer to the moment she would either succeed or doom them all. Kim Min-seo met her in the top-floor suite, arms crossed, a thin smile curling over his lips. "So you're the one who found him?" he said, curiosity laced with suspicion. Aaliyah played her part flawlessly. "I'm a waitress," she said evenly. "He came into my diner and collapsed. I tried to help, but he didn't make it." They pressed her for details. With calm precision, she described his symptoms, the way his pulse had throbbed weakly, the subtle signs of internal toxicity, all medical jargon that made her story convincing. She watched Min-seo's eyes flicker over her, noting how the tension in the room began to ease. He relaxed. Victory, in their eyes, was theirs. David Park uncorked a bottle of champagne. "To new leadership," he toasted, and the sound of glass clinking echoed the end of Hyun-jin's reign, or so they thought. The third conspirator revealed himself at last. Detective James Morrison, the American connection, leaning back in his chair with a smug expression. Immunity for cooperation, a cut of the profits. He'd been their shield, their unseen enabler. The trio discussed the division. Min-seo would oversee Korean operations, Park would control the money, and Morrison would remain untouchable by law. Aaliyah's pulse quickened as she listened through the wire. "What about the loose ends?" she asked quietly, careful to sound like a concerned messenger. Min-seo's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The brother is handled. Once we confirm Hyun-jin is really dead, we'll release him or not." This was the moment she'd been warned about. One misstep, and everything would blow. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "There's one more thing. He asked me to deliver a message before he died." The words rolled off her tongue in perfect Korean, the phrase Hyun-jin had drilled into her. Silence fell. Recognition flashed in Min-seo's eyes. This was the old code, one only Hyun-jin's loyalists would know. Chaos erupted. Doors burst open, and Hyun-jin stepped in, alive and commanding, flanked by the lieutenants who had remained steadfast. The scene cut to Marcus being extracted from the warehouse, unharmed, a swift intercut showing the simultaneity of their operation. Hyun-jin didn't fire a shot. Instead, he broadcast their confession to the entire organization. "You wanted my empire? You can't have it. Because it was never built on loyalty. It was built on fear. And I'm done being that man." The conspirators were exiled, their power stripped away in a world where reputation meant everything. Morrison lunged to arrest someone, only to realize he'd been recorded. Years of corruption documented, undeniable. He slinked away, the threat of justice hanging over him. Aaliyah's knees buckled, adrenaline finally catching up. Hyun-jin caught her, steadying her weight. "You did it," he murmured. She smiled, exhausted but triumphant. "We did it." David Park, desperate, tossed the vial of antidote toward Hyun-jin, bargaining silently. He caught it, administering it himself. "I don't need you to save me anymore," he said quietly. "That's already been done. Listen, we're about to get to the most intense part of the story. But before we do, I need you to do something. If you've been glued to this story from the beginning, if you've felt every moment of tension and every spark of hope, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because channels like mine survive on your support, and I promise to keep bringing you stories that make you feel something real. Drop a like if you're ready to see how this ends. And comment, trust the process if you believe Aaliyah and Hyun-jin are going to pull this off. Alright, no more delays. Let's get to the moment everything came to a head. 48 hours were almost up, the conspirators were gathering, and Aaliyah was about to walk into the lion's den. The city had shifted in subtle ways over the week. Hyun-jin moved through his office with a quiet authority that had evolved from the chaos, each decision measured, precise, informed by the loyalty he had rebuilt and the betrayals he had cast aside. The poison no longer hung over him, and for the first time in decades, he felt not only alive but fully in command of a future he could shape. True to his word, Marcus had been set up with legitimate business opportunities, scholarships, and protection that ensured his potential wouldn't be squandered on the streets. The boy's wide-eyed admiration never left his face, but the fear that had once tethered him to gang life had been replaced with cautious hope. Aaliyah watched the transformation around her quietly. Her grandmother's herbal shop had received a mysterious cash infusion, enough to expand into a community health center. The place buzzed with activity, volunteers and patients flowing in and out, the scent of herbs mingling with antiseptic and the low hum of laughter. It was a small miracle, the tangible result of her quiet insistence that someone's suffering need not be ignored. Even her own path was altered. An anonymous donor had offered her a full scholarship to return to medical school. Her decision not to walk away entirely tempered the relief and exhilaration. Hyun-jin had offered her a consulting position within his network. "My people need medical care they can trust," he said, voice steady. "You understand both worlds now." She had met his gaze and smiled, firm in her resolve. "I'm not your employee. I'm your partner, at least." Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. 6 months later, Aaliyah moved through her white-coated world, the clinic a beacon for underserved communities. Marcus, pre-med and eager, helped her navigate the flow of patients, learning from her as much as from the world outside. Hyun-jin arrived one morning, bringing a man injured in a scuffle, his loyalty unquestioned. Aaliyah raised an eyebrow, amusement flickering across her face. "What makes you think I work for gangsters?" she asked, carefully bandaging the patient. "You work for people," he said simply, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "I just happen to be one." The unspoken understanding between them had shifted everything. They had changed each other, saved each other, and neither was who they had been before. Strength, trust, and hope had replaced fear, isolation, and guilt. They stood on either side of a window, the city sprawling beyond them, a city that had tried to destroy both of them. Inside, however, was a world they had built by refusing to let one another die. Sunlight hit the floor in warm streaks, dust motes dancing, a quiet testimony to endurance and new beginnings. Aaliyah's voice filled the room softly, as if sharing a secret with anyone listening. "They say you can't change people. But maybe that's wrong. Maybe you can't change people who don't want to change. But if you can see who someone really is beneath everything they've had to become, maybe you can save them. And maybe they can save you right back." And that's how a ruthless mafia boss learned to trust again, and how a waitress who'd lost her way found her purpose. This story right here? This is what I live for. Stories about people who refuse to stay broken. Stories about second chances and unlikely partnerships. Stories that remind us that sometimes the person who saves you is the one you'd never expect. If this story moved you, if it made you believe in transformation, in redemption, in the power of seeing someone's humanity when everyone else sees a monster or a nobody, then I need you to do 3 things right now. 1. Hit that like button so hard it glows. This story deserves to be seen. 2. Subscribe and turn on all notifications because I drop stories like this every single week, and you're going to want to be here for every single one. 3. Share this. Send it to someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to change, that they're never too far gone, that the right person at the right time can see who they really are. Drop a comment telling me what moment hit you hardest. Was it when Aaliyah first saved him? When she outsmarted the conspirators? Or that final scene where they met again as equals? I want to know, because your comments fuel these stories. This is the kind of story Hollywood doesn't tell enough. The kind where the forgotten become unforgettable, where the overlooked become invaluable, where two people from opposite ends of the world find each other in the darkness and bring each other into the light. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about these characters as much as I do. And I'll see you in the next story, where we'll find more unlikely heroes doing impossible things. Until then, remember, you never know who's watching. You never know whose life you might save. You never know when showing someone mercy might be the thing that saves you both. This has been the story of Lee Hyun-jin and Aaliyah Grant. Two people who had every reason to walk away from each other and every reason to stay.